January 9, 2023, of the following members on the part of the House to the Joint Economic Committee.
Mr. Schweikert of Arizona, Mr. Arrington of Texas, Mr. Estes of Kansas, Mr. Ferguson of Georgia, Mr. Smucker of Pennsylvania, Ms. Maliotakis of New York, Mr. Beyer of Virginia, Mr. Trone of Maryland, Ms. Moore of Wisconsin, Ms. Porter of California.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to submit extraneous materials into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, today could be the last tax day our country ever has. Let that sink in. Today could be the last tax day our country ever has. Monday, April 15, 2024, could be just another spring day if Congress acts now and passes the only tax reform proposal to ever make it on the New York Times bestseller list, the Fair Tax Act. H.R. 25, the Fair Tax, is a simple, fair, and preferred alternative to our current tax system, which puts bureaucrats before the basic needs of hardworking Americans. The bill would eliminate, as in do away with, the federal income, the federal payroll, and the estate and gift taxes, replacing them with a revenue-neutral national 23% consumption tax. Now look, Mr. Speaker, nobody likes taxes, but given the choice between a payroll tax, an income tax, an estate tax, or a gift tax, or a consumption tax, people would prefer a consumption tax because they are in control then. It would also eliminate the need for the IRS. It would eliminate tax day. No more tax day. How many people out there right now in this country are sweating as a result of today being tax day, are just sitting at home just thinking, oh, if I can just get through this day? It would allow you to take home 100% of your paycheck so that you control where your hard-earned dollars go. The best part about this is you don't need a law degree or a CPA license to understand it. It's simple, it's fair, it's preferred. For every dollar you pay for a new good or service, 23 cents will go to the federal government and 77 cents will go to the business. It's that simple. I agree, 23% is too high, but it's much better than what you're paying now. Much better than what you're paying now, because this time, have you ever looked at your paycheck? Ever looked at how much you get paid and how much you get to take home? It's ridiculous. No more, no less, no legal or financial expertise would be required. As I said, 23% consumption tax is a lot. No one likes paying taxes, me included. I don't like paying taxes. I understand it, and I'm certainly willing to do my part. But I would surely prefer to have control over it instead of some unelected bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., as it is now having control over it. But what many consumers fail to realize, and what Washington Democrats conveniently ignore, is that today's sticker prices are already inflated to cover corporations' tax burdens. Every tax imposed on businesses, whether it's corporate, FICA, or other taxes, is passed down to consumer. You're already paying taxes every time you purchase a good or service. Under the fair tax, only paying yours, not anyone else's. That's right. On the fair tax, you will only be paying for what you consume. That's what a consumption tax does. I'm going to pause right now, and then I'll come back and finish what I've got to say about this. But this time, I want to recognize my friend from Arizona who wants to speak on this fair tax. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter. I appreciate so much you leading on this issue. I can't tell you. I was thinking as you were talking about the first job I ever had, and I was making, this is really going to date me, but I was making $2.50 an hour. And I thought, holy mackerel, that's $100. I was working 40 hours. I'm going to bring home $100. No, it was $75. And that was a million years ago. I'd bring home less today because everything else has gone up. And I'll just tell you something about that. I've watched that same thing happen to each one of my children. And we live in this world where the federal government kind of clamps down on you. I appreciate this so much. The Fair Tax Act would repeal all federal corporate and individual income taxes, payroll taxes, self-employment taxes, capital gains taxes, death taxes, gift taxes, and replace them with a revenue-neutral consumption tax. You know what's so nice about a consumption tax is you choose whether you're going to pay it. You choose whether you're going to pay it because it's how you consume. We pay too much already in federal taxes, and under this administration, they're paying silent taxes they never voted for. Since this administration took over, Americans are paying nearly 15% more for goods and services due to the inflation tax. Look, I have introduced legislation, I know others have as well, to repeal the 16th Amendment to permanently abolish the federal income tax. This is a fantastic bill that you have, Mr. Carter. I don't need to remind you that the federal government takes up to 37% away from families, away from your dinner tables, away from your gas tank, and pays for drag shows in Ecuador and $85,000 Bob Dylan statues, for Pete's sakes. Americans know how to spend their own money better than politicians do. And under the fair tax workers, everybody's going to take home 100% of their paycheck with no federal taxes withheld. Americans would decide how much they pay in taxes through the choices they make to purchase and consume goods and services. That means that Americans would keep their entire paycheck they worked for and have the freedom to decide how they spend their money. Now, flat taxes are sometimes criticized as disproportionately affecting lower-income Americans negatively, but the fair tax accounts for that by providing a prebate. This prebate is an advanced tax refund to every legal American family at the beginning of every month to purchase goods and services tax-free up to the national poverty level. And that's been compared, quite frankly, to the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is part of our Byzantine structure today. And when I was in law school, my first year in law school, and this is also 100 years ago, this is back before you had the internet. This is back when I worked for a tax firm. I was their librarian. Every week I went in and for hours updated a room full of tax books, the regulations and the code itself being updated all the time, as Congress would decide who gets a special break and who doesn't. But the fair tax instead encourages economic growth. It's more efficient, it's more productive than our current tax code. This means investment, wages, and consumption are higher than they are under the current income tax. In light of the Democrat majority in Congress and the Biden administration, both of which have made clear their policies are to tax, spend, and control the American people, the fair tax provides the perfect alternative that gives Americans more freedom. Without a national income tax, there would be no need to file taxes or to have an IRS, which this bill defunds. You had me at hello with that. In addition to closing the many loopholes in the current tax code, the fair tax would reach a much larger group of taxpayers, which 9 states have already seen the benefits of firsthand by eliminating their state income taxes. Representative Carter, thank you for letting me speak on behalf of your bill. I think it's a wonderful bill. I support it. I encourage all of my colleagues to support this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona for his insightful comments. I think we've all had that aha moment when we got our first paycheck. And we said, wait a minute, I was supposed to make X amount, but I'm only taking home this amount. Why is that? Well, the reason why is because you're having to pay an income tax, a payroll tax. You haven't paid all these taxes. But with the consumption tax, with the fair tax, you decide. You want to buy a boat, you're going to pay taxes. You don't want to pay taxes, don't buy the boat. That's all there is to it. And I appreciate the gentleman mentioning this about every time you buy something, you're paying taxes. Every time you purchase a good or a service. But under the fair tax, you're only paying for your good or service. You're only paying your tax, not someone else's. There's no other tax proposal, serious tax proposal, that would overhaul the largest and the most regressive tax that the majority of Americans pay, the payroll tax, while making the United States the most competitive place in the world to do business. It honestly baffles me that my friends on the other side of the aisle haven't embraced this proposal with open arms, because it will save taxpayers time, money, and headaches, while ensuring that those with more money to spend, aka the wealthy, after all, when they buy a boat, it's a big boat, usually a yacht, and the taxes on a yacht a lot bigger. Now, I'm going to buy a John boat. Taxes aren't going to be as much on it, but they buy yachts, and the taxes are high on that, so they're going to pay their fair share. That's one of the criticisms that I always hear. Oh, the wealthy, they don't pay their part. Well, let me tell you, they consume a whole lot more. Who's going to benefit most from this? The people making between $30,000 and $50,000 a year. Those are the people who are going to benefit from this. Those are the people that I'm talking about here. Under this proposal, every legal American family will receive a prebate, as was mentioned. A prebate on their taxes up to the national poverty level. So don't tell me this about, oh, this is going to penalize the very least money earners. No, that's not the case at all, because the prebate is going to take care of that. This means that a family of four can spend $30,000 a year without paying a penny in taxes. That's an effective tax rate of 0. Close your eyes. That's how much it is, 0. No matter how you slice it, this bill is a much better deal for middle and low income earners than it is for those at the top. That's what I don't understand, Mr. Speaker, from those on the other side of the aisle who are always saying, oh, the rich, they don't pay their fair share. Well, this is why we have the fair tax. That's why you have a consumption tax, so they'll be paying their fair share. And I hear this about, oh, the illegals here, they don't pay taxes. Well, if they're going to buy something here, they're going to be paying tax now. They'll be paying a fair tax. We will be able to capture that underground economy, if you will. As distasteful as it may be, the pimps, the prostitutes, they're going to be paying taxes because they consume. They go out and they buy groceries. They go out and they buy stuff. And that's where you're going to be paying the taxes on. No matter how you slice it, this bill is a much better deal for middle and low income earners than it is for those at the top. The fair tax provides freedom to choose when you pay your taxes and how much you spend. You're in control. Don't let Washington, D.C. decide how much you're going to pay in taxes. You decide. That's why the administration, that's why those on the other side of the aisle don't like it, because they lose control of you, and you have control. Instead of taking money from every single dollar you earn, you're only paying taxes on the money you spend, leaving more room for paying down debt, retirement, college, savings, and more. All of us speaking in support of this legislation today know that this is a big idea, and it is a big idea. It's a big change, although as Mr. Biggs mentioned, there are 9 states that do it. Oh, by the way, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, they don't have an income tax. They're doing fine. Some of the strongest economies in the world right there, and they're doing fine. We know that overturning an entrenched tax code with thousands of special interests invested in keeping their carve-outs possess a significant challenge. It does pose a significant challenge. But we didn't come to Congress to maintain the status quo. At least that's not why I came here. I thought we were here for big ideas. This is a big idea. And for those who are just turning it off, saying, oh, no, I'll remind them, a closed mind is a dead mind. Got to have an open mind with this. That's why this is so good. The only people with something to lose are those who gain their power and money on the back of this convoluted, broken system. And there are those who know how to play it. I know that. You know that as well. That's why it's time for the fair tax. That's why it's time to put Americans first. And at this time, I want to recognize one of my colleagues he has an opinion or two about taxes. I know he does. He's had an experience with taxes too, like many of us have. This time I will recognize, for as much time as he shall consume, my colleague from Georgia, Representative Andrew Clyde.
Thank you to my dear friend and fellow Georgian, Congressman Buddy Carter. I'm proud to be a staunch supporter and original co-sponsor of Mr. Carter's Fair Tax Act, a common-sense piece of legislation designed to create a simplified and fair code that works for everyone. Most Americans would agree that tax season is stressful and at times intimidating. This is largely due to the fact that our tax code has become overwhelmingly complicated and the IRS is generally unavailable on the phone. In fact, over the past year, my Gainesville district office has processed nearly 200 casework issues involving the IRS. And with an IRS backlog of more than 2 million returns, I know this issue is felt by taxpayers across the country. While great reforms were made by President Trump in his 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I believe the next necessary step is to completely overhaul our overly complex tax code with the fair tax. The fair tax represents a long-term solution by repealing all federal corporate and individual income taxes, payroll taxes, self-employment taxes, and death taxes, replacing our misguided system with a revenue-neutral personal consumption tax. Under a fair tax, Americans would be able to keep their entire paycheck and only pay taxes on the goods and services that they actually purchase. With no national income tax, there would be no need to file a tax return. And April 15th, or in this year's case, April the 18th, today, would become just another beautiful spring day. The fair tax is also a critical step to truly stop the weaponization of the IRS. In 2013, I was a victim of IRS abuse through unjustified civil asset forfeiture against my small business to the tune of $940,000. I relentlessly fought back for months, eventually reclaiming my hard-earned money through the court system, and then I took my case to Congress, leading to the creation and passage of what eventually became called the Clyde Hirsch-Sowers Respect Act, which President Trump signed into law to ensure no American faces this injustice ever again. But unfortunately, I know that I'm not the only victim of the severe overreach of the Internal Revenue Service. In fact, to make matters worse, just last year, my Democrat colleagues provided the IRS with a whopping $80 billion with the primary purpose of expanding the already bloated agency. The IRS recently confirmed it is set to hire nearly 30,000 new employees over the next 2 years, drastically increasing the agency's auditing capabilities in order to rake in billions of dollars to pay for President Biden's pricey Green New Deal agenda. House Republicans' first vote this Congress repealed this unnecessary funding authorization, and it's past time for Congress to fully recoup this money, sending a strong message that this institution values fiscal responsibility and stands against the weaponization of the IRS. Not only would Congressman Carter's Fair Tax Act eliminate the need for the IRS, but it would also lead to economic prosperity. Economists resoundingly agree that the fair tax would significantly boost our nation's economy. Eliminating corporate taxes would incentivize corporations to headquarter in the United States, which would provide new jobs and economic development in our communities. The cost savings these companies experience will drive the competitive market, ultimately lowering prices of goods and services for Americans. In turn, Americans would have more freedom to reinvest in the economy, since there would be no tax on pure investments. In closing, I am a proud supporter of Rep. Carter's Fair Tax Act, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support this common sense bill to not only simplify but also improve our tax system. Thank you to my friend, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and he brings up some great points. You know, I want to very quickly go over a couple of myths, if you will. I know you find it hard to believe, but there are some myths out there about the fair tax. First of all, the myth is the fair tax rate is really 30%, not 23%. And I agree, 23% is too high. Wish it could be lower. But it's not 30%. You see, our current income tax is expressed as an inclusive tax. When directly comparing the fair tax to our current income tax, the fair tax rate is 23%. Under the fair tax, if you pay $100, simple math now, you pay $100 for a good, $77 goes for the good, and there's an inclusive $23 tax. If you take the $23 as a percentage of the $100, the tax rate is 23%. Unfortunately, opponents of the fair tax, and unbelievably there are some out there, they typically speak of the fair tax in terms of an exclusive tax, simply because the rate sounds higher to consumers. It is 23%. Simple math, 23%. Not only do opponents of the fair tax fail to admit that the inclusive and exclusive rates have consumers paying the same amount of money, but they also compare the exclusive fair tax rate to the inclusive income tax rate. That's unfair and that's misleading. That's a myth. It is 23%. Again, I get it. I know that's too high. I wish it would be lower. But it's not 30%, it's 23%. The only other thing I want to mention at this point is that the myth is that the fair tax, and we mentioned this earlier, that it would hurt the poor and give the rich a huge tax cut. Baloney. The fair tax is the only progressive tax reform bill currently pending before Congress. Each household, as I mentioned earlier, will receive a monthly prebate based on federal poverty levels and household size that will allow families to purchase necessary goods such as food, shelter, and medicine essentially tax-free. 0%. This is similar to our current individual exemption and refundable tax credit system. Essentially the same thing, but just far simpler. Further, the fair tax is not riddled with shelters and loopholes, meaning wealthy taxpayers cannot minimize what they pay in taxes, regardless of how many lawyers and accountants they hire to advise them. It's simple, it's fair, it's preferred. I want to go now to another colleague from Georgia, great new member of our delegation, who certainly knows a thing or two about taxes, having been in business for many years himself. The gentleman from Georgia, Representative Mike Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. And as someone that represents the great University of Georgia, it's nice to see you pick up the football and run with this thing. And you're also right. I have spent my private life over 30-plus years in one of the most regulated and taxed industries that there are in this country. So, yeah, it is very near and dear to my heart. And I want to thank you also for leading on a Georgia original bill which originated with Congressman John Linder. You know, the IRS was weaponized early on in the Obama administration. And the only thing that came out of that, the result of that, was Lois Lerner being found in contempt of Congress, and then you saw the issue go away. Now, the Biden administration, with the addition of 87,000 IRS agents, their new target, the middle class and small businesses. It's time for a new tax system that works for all Americans. So today, I rise in support of H.R. 25, the Fair Tax Act. Our tax act system is in desperate need of reform, and this bill will let Americans keep their hard-earned paychecks and get rid of the IRS. The Fair Tax Act will eliminate payroll and income taxes and greatly reduce compliance costs on small businesses by replacing all of these with a consumption tax on new goods and services. The current tax system is purposely complicated, burdensome, and confusing. So only the well-navigated can navigate the loopholes. So why wouldn't we want to make it simpler and more understandable so that small businesses and workers can thrive? From my first day in Congress, I have been focused on making the federal government more transparent and accountable to the American taxpayer. And the fair tax does just that. Every time Americans buy a product or service, they will know exactly how much they will pay in taxes and will be able to factor that into their decisions. There will be no more complex, expensive, end-of-the-year federal tax filings. You know, the only way big legislation is passed in this town is when the American people demand it. And the way we get them on board, we need to hold hearings across this country to explain the ideas and the details of the fair tax. We need to discuss and debate the bill publicly so that the Americans can consider this proposal. Once they hear about it, though, I am confident that they will support the concept of a fair tax. Now let's get to work. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And again, here you got a business owner. He knows all about taxes. And when he talks about a business that is one of the most regulated in the country, he and our previous speaker, Mr. Clyde, Representative Clyde, boy, you talk about regulated businesses. Both of them have regulated businesses. Both of them understand firsthand, personal experience, real life experience about the IRS and about taxes. I want to address one more myth here. The myth that the fair tax will unfairly punish senior citizens living off their retirement income. Unfairly punish senior citizens living off of their retirement income? Wrong. Retired individuals living on fixed income will benefit from the fair tax, just like all other Americans will benefit. The new system will eliminate the current income tax on Social Security benefits. You looked at your Social Security check lately? It's not what it started out at because they take out taxes on it. It'll also eliminate the income taxes on investment income, something a lot of retirees have and they depend on it. On pension, on benefits, individual retirement accounts, IRAs, withdrawals. It eliminates all of that. So don't tell me it's going to punish retirees. It's going to do just the opposite. The monthly prebate will offset the taxes paid by seniors on essential goods. I hear this, old people aren't going to be able to afford groceries. They're not going to be able to afford shelter. Wrong. Wrong. They're going to be able to afford it. That's what the prebate's about. You'll essentially, up to $30,000 for a family of four, your essential tax rate's going to be zero, nil. Again, senior citizens living off of their retirement income after the initial implementation of the fair tax, if prices increase penny for penny, seniors will receive additional Social Security benefits until prices return to or below pre-fair tax levels. This is simple. It's fair. It's preferred. I want to go now to my colleague from Alabama, Representative Barry Moore, who certainly understands a thing or two about taxes. He's paid enough taxes in his life, I'm sure. And I will yield to him as much time as he shall consume.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to express my support for making Tax Day a thing of the past. Our current tax code is 4 times as long as the King James Bible, but contains none of the good news. Last Congress, Pelosi and the Democrats made it their mission to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. Furthermore, Biden's budget calls for the highest level of taxation in American history with $4.7 trillion in new taxes. A recent analysis by the Tax Foundation found that Biden's $4.7 trillion tax hike on workers, families, farmers, and small businesses would destroy over 300,000 American jobs, cut workers' wages by 1%, and reduce American economic growth by 1.3%. President Biden and the Democrats want every day to be tax day, but today I introduced legislation that would abolish the 16th Amendment, and I'm also a proud supporter of the Fair Tax Act. The Fair Tax Act would eliminate all personal and corporate income taxes, abolish the death tax, eliminate gift and payroll taxes, repeal the tax code and replace it with a single national consumption tax, and my favorite part, it would abolish the IRS. This is the gold standard for tax law and would turn the convoluted, abusive, and biased system into a straightforward code that works for every American. Instead of inflating our already bloated bureaucracy and continuing to punish those who work hard to succeed, Americans deserve a system that works for them. I want to thank my colleague, Buddy Carter, for his work on this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and again, great points, great points. One more myth, Mr. Speaker. The fair tax will make new homes too expensive and it will eliminate incentives like the mortgage interest rate deduction. Now, I hear this all the time. Again, wrong. Under the current system, every time a new home is purchased, the home buyer is paying an increased price that results from embedded costs. See, that's what people don't understand. Taxes are embedded. They're embedded in the prices that you're paying right now. Under the fair tax, when you buy a new home, these embedded costs are eliminated, meaning the cost for consumers can fall relative to the price of home construction and compliance costs. Additionally, under the fair tax, mortgage interest rates are expected to drop as interest income falls toward the tax-free bond rate. Mortgage interest rates are expected to fall under the fair tax. Wow. At this time, I want to yield as much time as he shall consume to a great advocate of tax reform, the gentleman from Virginia, Representative Bob Good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the gentleman from Georgia for his leadership on this critically important issue. You know, you might say what the House of Representatives does is tax and spend. Thankfully, we're the party that wants to tax less and spend less, so it's a win-win for the American people, a win-win for freedom, a win-win for Americans as a whole. You know, it's appropriate on this day of all days, National Tax Day, to be discussing the state of our tax system. It's no secret to most Americans that the IRS does not serve their interests, and worse yet, frequently uses its power to target law-abiding American citizens and conservative groups. But the American people are tired, sick and tired of dealing with a broken, confusing, and even hostile tax system. In fact, my office regularly hears from constituents who simply want to get an answer from the IRS when they're trying to do their taxes, or want to know why they're forced to pay taxes for things such as just an inheritance from their loved ones. But rather than take a hard look at the current situation, the Biden administration has made it clear they want to further weaponize the IRS against hardworking Americans by spending $80 billion to hire an estimated 87,000 new agents to harass, intimidate, and threaten taxpayers. In fact, in Virginia's 5th District, one of the things I commonly hear is, what we need more of is IRS agents. Of course, I've never heard that in Virginia's 5th District. The American people deserve a better tax system that does not needlessly target them or even punish them for doing their best to work hard, to put food on the table, and comply with an ever more complicated tax code. The addition of these 87,000 IRS agents should raise alarm bells for all Americans, since the IRS and its employees regularly do not follow the limits of their lawful directive, and we can point to example after example. Matter of fact, just last month, an IRS employee was found guilty of 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft, 5 counts of evading and assisting in the preparation and presentation of a false and fraudulent return, and 3 counts of making and subscribing a false and fraudulent tax return. Clearly, the American people do not need more powerful and more emboldened IRS. The current system must change, and that's where this bill comes into play from my friend from Georgia, Mr. Carter. The Fair Tax Act. This tax system is easy to understand, and it will save billions in compliance for taxpayers and for the federal government. And it holds all Americans to the same standard, a 23% sales tax. In doing so, Americans will not be onerously taxed on what they earn. Instead, they pay a fair tax on what they consume, and it puts Americans in control of the taxes that they pay. It removes the discrimination that's in the tax system because everybody pays taxes based on what they consume. Organized crime pays taxes. Crime cartels pay taxes. The mafia pays taxes. Tax cheats are paying. Under-the-table earners are paying, and you get the idea. Today, the average American worker is forced to pay the federal government 33 cents of every dollar they earn, as opposed to what we're proposing today, which is the fair tax for 23 cents of every dollar they spend if they choose to spend it. And thanks to the prebate plan in this bill, taxpayers will be able to spend up to the poverty guideline and have that amount be exempt from the impact of the 23% tax. And Implementing this national sales tax will double the amount of taxpayers in the system. Instead of having just about 150 million American taxpayers who currently are having to pay income taxes, this would bring about 300 million Americans as consumers into the tax revenue. Everyone would be participating based on what they consume. Wealthy people would pay more because they spend more. They make more expensive purchases. And not to mention 51 million annual foreign tourists and some 12 million illegal immigrants in our country, illegal aliens who reside here. The fair tax is a common sense reform that will unburden the American people and stimulate economic growth. Individuals will have more control over their finances and not be threatened with penalties or double taxation for investing and saving their own money. So rather than guess how much you owe each year or how much the government owes you, what a lot of us just had to do here, the fair tax will enable taxpayers to know exactly how much they're paying. So thank you to my friend Buddy Carter for his leadership in this, the gentleman from Georgia, that will put the American taxpayer first, unleash economic growth, and hold everyone accountable to one simple tax requirement. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Did you hear what he just said? Unleash American growth. Unleash American growth. Wow. What great words. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the bottom line. Our current tax system is broken. It is broken, and it's oppressive. The fair tax allows Americans to keep 100% of their paycheck, of their hard-earned paycheck, and it ends the IRS headache. A family of four earning $30,000 a year, they're going to pay zero, not 1 penny in taxes. Further, this bill will save small businesses hundreds of billions of dollars a year in compliance costs, making it easier to start and grow a business here in America. We need that. We need more small businesses. By capturing the underground economy, and almost every speaker has talked about this, we're going to be capturing the underground economy. Tourism dollars, purchases made by illegal immigrants. This bill will save Social Security while leaving more money in the hands of the American people and revolutionizing our economy. Mr. Speaker, at this time I want to recognize the latest sponsor of the Fair Tax Bill and recognize him for as much time as he shall consume, the gentleman from New York, Representative George Santos.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The American people need tax relief, and I rise today to share my unapologetic support for the Fair Tax Act. Taxes continue to skyrocket in states like New York. Many of my constituents pay nearly $50,000 in local taxes. Of that amount, $10K can be deducted for gross income. The rest gets taxed twice. I've introduced 2 bills regarding tax deductions, H.R. 1260, the SALT Relief Tax Act, and H.R. 2634, the Alimony Relief Act. Both of my bills seek additional deductions for taxpayers forced to submit to government-directed payments. Regarding alimony, I hope to repeal the section of law within the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which places the tax liability of government-mandated payments on the person who makes the payment and not the payee. Why should the person earning the money but not spending it pay the tax liability? Mr. Carter's Fair Tax Act ensures that we pay taxes on what we buy rather than what we earn, and would make both my bills unnecessary. The hours spent every year doing tax returns wouldn't be necessary, and Americans would have more time to spend with their families. I hope we can make real progress on the Fair Tax Act, but in the meantime, I would welcome my colleagues to support my efforts, and I look forward to the day when a simpler tax code is afforded to our constituents, all of our constituents. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Very insightful comments, and I appreciate that very much. I want to thank all my colleagues for their support in speaking in favor of America's favorite tax proposal. Yeah, it's been around for quite a while now, but its time has come. Its time has come. This bill, in fact, was first proposed by Representative John Linder. member of the Georgia delegation, whose chief of staff, Rob Woodall, took over the bill when he was elected to Congress, another Georgian. When Rob retired, he asked me if I would take over this legislation, and I was honored to do so, because I made a commitment when I became a member of Congress that this would be the first bill I would co-sponsor as a member of Congress, and it was. And it has been ever since I've been a member of Congress. Co-sponsoring this bill was my first act as a member of Congress, and I'm eager to see this landmark bill finally get the attention and legislative action it deserves. It's fair. It's simple. It's preferred. You're in control. You decide how much you want to pay in taxes. Not some unelected bureaucrat. Not some member of Congress who decides they need a loophole or a tax break for something. No, you're going to decide. You're going to decide what you're going to pay taxes on and what you're not going to pay taxes on. Again, as I started out tonight, today could be the last tax day our country ever sees. The last one. Let that sink in. Today could be the last tax day our country ever sees. All we have to do is to adopt the fair tax, a consumption tax. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.